great project. Moving on to Seaborn. Seaborn, essentially, Matplotlibs is just the structure. I'm not going to say bare bones. It's got a lot, but it's just so flexible and open and adaptable that it can't be as templated and as it just cannot be as templated as you would think, right? They don't spend their time developing ways for like templates for people. There's some things that have templates, but that's really not what the Matplotlib people are doing. The group that's doing Seaborn, like if you're a volunteer who's going to volunteer for a project and you volunteer for the Matplotlib organization or you volunteer for Seaborn to support what they're doing, a designer, a visual designer, someone who went to, a art school or a design academy or is like some web front end designer, someone with a visual eye is going to want to go more toward like the Seaborn community. Someone who's more nuts and bolts, like of a coder, maybe you're colorblind or this or that or however, a little bit. I mean, there's different levels of it. Maybe they're going to gravitate more towards Matplotlib, assuming they wanted to volunteer. You're not going to get paid in these places. But essentially, Seaborn is providing us some templates. They're solving some problems. They're making it easy. I think briefly you saw my code. I was making those heat maps with one line of code. I'm making a heat map with one line of code. But I'm also doing prep work before that to get my data ready. My data is ready before it goes into all these visualization methods. Because when I'm looking at that visualization method, I want to know that it's clean. I can just take a quick look at it, make sure it's working. But a lot of possibilities here. Okay, well, they want to make things easier. The big thing people use Seaborn for, and the thing that it's really the best for, is heat maps. If you're making a heat map, you make it in Seaborn. Always. Always, always, almost always. Alias for Seaborn, it's SNS. So Seaborn SNS, you're going to see that SNS. This is from documentation. It's a heat map with a kind of this agglomerative correlation. This is a clustering, right? Yeah, I think it's. I'm not sure. I think this is just a method that you just part of the method. You just put it in there and it'll add this to it. So very easy to do this. Adds more information. I mean, you've got the heat map. You might as well know, what the linkages are. So this data set with the seasons, bike rentals and stuff is pretty famous. And, well, it's pretty common for teaching data visualization. It's been out there, so probably people have seen it, really. But they're using it. It's part of the Seaborn documentation. I take a lot of this straight out of the documentation. So I'm more confident that it's correct, and the documentation usually is pretty good in these places. And when you all go to the documentation later when you need it, it'll be more familiar to you. Because really, what I'm doing is digesting the documentation for you so that you can read it as a slide rather than going in the documentation, because I know that y'all aren't going to do that yet in your careers. Some of you probably will. Some of you. If you want to do, if you want to do something complicated, you're going to have to go into documentation. A lot.